So good morning, good morning. Good evening, everyone, again. It's great to see everyone here. And my name is Donna Ward. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of the Montclair area. And I'm very happy tonight to introduce two guest speakers who are going to be talking to us about debunking the myths or the common misperceptions about the Electoral College. I hope many of you know, since most of you are in the League, that the League of Women Voters since 1970 has believed that the Electoral College should be abolished in favor of a direct popular vote. That position was reinforced at the last general meeting of the League held in June of last year in Denver. People said, we've been working on this for a long time, it can't be done. Well, people also said that women would never get the vote, but the League certainly was instrumental in making that happen. Maybe we can do the same here. The two experts that we have tonight are going to help us understand how to respond to this challenge. Alan Moghul is the executive director of the National Vote, and Rosemary Heileman is chair of the League of Women Voters of the U.S. Task Force to abolish Electoral College. Dr. Moghul has volunteered on presidential political campaigns since the early 2000s, and most recently ran a small business on the Maryland Eastern Shore. He co-founded the organization, The National Vote, in early 2021. Although originally trained in pathology, Dr. Moghul worked in the cancer research field at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center and the Pennsylvania State University. He was also an adjunct professor of biology prior to working in the public health field, both for profit and nonprofit in Washington, D.C. for 23 years. And I hope, Alan, tonight you're going to explain how you pivoted from medicine to trying to abolish the Electoral College.
I still haven't figured that part out yet.
Hey, we all have our passions, We've got our day job and then we have our passions. Everyone here on the call can attest to that tonight. And then we have Rosemary Heileman, who's the chair of the Electoral College Task Force for the League of Women Voters US. She's a founding member of the League of Women Voters Deerfield Electoral College Committee, which has been working since 2017 to educate the public about the need to abolish the Electoral College permanently by constitutional amendment. She's on the board of the League of Deerfield, Lincolnshire, Illinois, and has been in the League for over 40 years. Since retiring after 30 years of teaching, she's taken on roles in ILOs within Illinois and also at the state level in Illinois. So welcome both Alan and Rosemary tonight. And I think, Rosemary, we're going to start with you, who's going to give us kind of a background on the League's position on the Electoral College. This is not our first rodeo in this. We've been working on this for a long time, and then Alan will speak. I just asked for people, we will entertain questions and comments at the end. If you have things that are burning on your mind as we go along, just put them into the chat, but we'll open up at the end and we can have a discussion about this. Thanks.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I'll make a small correction. We are not an official LWVUS task force, but our committee, which is still under Deerfield, Lincolnshire, recently there was a request to national from another state asking for a presentation, and LWVUS told them to call us, and they called us the working group. So we're like, ooh, we're the working group now. So
your way up the ranks, right?
So task force working group, it's the same thing, I think. And so we're pretty pleased about that. So I've been asked to do two topics. One is the historical background, and then also of the Electoral College, and also of the League involvement. So starting out, let's see. Why aren't my, there we go. You recognize this picture, of course, our founding fathers. They were prominent leaders of the time, fiercely protective of their own states' rights and trying to start a brand new country. So it was not an easy task to come up with something from scratch. And what I want to highlight are some of the less known features that they came up with, which at the time seemed like a good idea, or it was a compromise because of the need to be considerate of the desires of all these different states that you were trying to get to work together. And so there were compromises, and we live with them now, and we'll see what they came up with. But the main thing that we've had a few speakers at our committee, one of our speakers said, we have to use the give them some slack rule, because they could not have foreseen how the future would play out. They were just trying to get something off the ground. So two of the compromises that have relevance for the Electoral College were, one, the 3/5 compromise, which was arrived at to satisfy the large slaveholding states that had large slave populations. And you all read about it when you were in high school, and it counted each slave as 3/5 of a person for their count in the House of Representatives. And then the other compromise, which we're familiar with, it was the setting up of the Senate, so that the small states each had equal representation in at least one house, so that they didn't feel that they would get overrun by the large states. So when the topic of the how to choose the president came up, there was a lot of discussion. And don't forget, they were tired. They'd been there in Philadelphia all summer. They wanted to go home. And so what they finally came up with utilized these compromises they had already arrived at. And each state was given the same number of electors as they had representatives in Congress. So that benefited the slave states, because that was the 3/5 compromise came into play there up until the Civil War. But the other less known feature that people don't think about are those extra two that they got as a representative of the Senate number. So what this means is, in today's terms, this is less known feature number one. California, for example, has about 50, 55 electors. So let's say they have 53 representatives, and then for their whole population, you throw in two more for this, to represent the senators. That doesn't increase that much the influence of each elector per population. It spreads it out a little bit more. But a state like Wyoming, which has only one representative for 600,000 people, now you give them two extra to represent the two senators. Now you've tripled the number of electors for that 600,000. And so each elector in Wyoming represents a much smaller number of people than the electors in California do. So that compromise has impact in today and the power of the less populated states. The other less well-known feature that isn't talked about too much, but has become very important in recent times, is the actual wording of the United States Constitution when it comes to the electors. And I'm going to read it out loud. Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors equal to the whole number of senators and representatives to which the state may be entitled in Congress. So they had a lot of discussions on how are you going to decide who these wise men would be. And they just decided finally to leave it up to the states. Well, this has not changed. So theoretically, legislatures could abandon the elections in their state and leave the choosing of the electors up to the state legislatures. That has not changed. So in 1804, which was several years after the Constitution was adopted, you will see that the different states had different ways of going about it. There were 6 states still in 1804 that had each elector chosen by the state legislatures. And South Carolina there among them, you notice that they're northern and southern states. South Carolina did not allow the people to vote for the electors until after the Civil War. And then some of the electors were chosen by voters statewide. You see, there were 7 states there. And then all kinds of combinations. 3 states had it divided into districts with 1 per district. Kentucky had 2 equal districts and half were picked from each. And Massachusetts had what 2 states still have: 2 electors chosen by voters statewide and 1 elector chosen per congressional district in a statewide vote. So Maine and Nebraska still use, because they have the choice, this last system. Well, they're smaller states, so they have two in Maine, I think 3 in Nebraska. So one elector for each of those congressional districts, and then 2 representing the 2 extra are voted by at large. Well, in Illinois, if we did something like that, Illinois is a very heavily gerrymandered state. And all those states that are heavily gerrymandered, if they decided to do something like that, then the effects of state gerrymandering would be very impactful on the choice of electors. And if you remember seeing a certain lawyer sitting in front of the Michigan State Legislature around right after January 6th, trying to get them to overturn the vote of their people in the 2020 election, he was not that far off. They had already had their election. They did not have legislation that would allow them to overturn the election. But now there are some state legislatures where legislators are submitting bills, none have been passed yet, that would allow the state legislatures to write some kind of rule that they could either overturn the vote of the people in their state or not allow the people of their state to vote or any other combination. The state legislatures have that authority as long as it goes along with their own constitution, which most of their state constitutions don't address this because it's a federal. And that still exists today. So that's one of the biggest threats that we see today left over from that decision to allow the states to choose how they were going to pick the electors. So this pretty much summarizes all of that. All the rest of the states have winner-take-all systems, which I'm not going to go into, but that has its own problems. And that's what I said. So how did the League of Women Voters get involved in this issue? You all know that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization, very interested in voter service, but that we do take up certain issues that we feel would be good for the country. And if you've ever been involved in a league study, you know it's a very involved kind of procedure for a national study. And in 1968, the league did undertake a study on the Electoral College. And the reason was that the election of 1968 scared people throughout the country quite a bit because, and this is going to lead us to less known feature number 3, Richard Nixon and Hubert Humphrey were really pretty close. And George Wallace was a pretty well-known person in the news, and he was running as a third-party candidate with the intent to disrupt the election. So, you know, you have to, in those days, it was still 270. 270 is the majority number required of electors to be chosen as president. So Nixon earned 43.4% of the popular vote. Humphrey earned 42.7% of the popular vote, and Wallace earned 13.5% of the popular vote. Now, in many states, it was quite close. So it happened that it fell on Nixon's advantage in some of those close states. So he did have 301, which was over what he needed. He only needed 270. Wallace was hoping that it would have been closer, that some of those states might have fallen on the side of Humphrey, and then those 46 electoral votes of Wallace, or maybe if he'd even been able to get a couple more, meant that the election, if no one has the 270, would have gone into the House of Representatives. Now, that's the third less known feature. If it goes into the House of Representatives, then each delegation gets one vote. So if no one has a majority, then the entire delegation of California, all 50 representatives, get one vote. The entire delegation in Illinois, all 19, have to get together. They get one vote. That guy in Wyoming gets one vote. So even in a heavily Democratic Congress, let's say under Obama, even though the Congress by numbers was a Democratic House, in those years, if you had done it delegation by delegation, it actually would have been a Republican House of Representatives at that time. So this is another less known feature of the Electoral College that takes the choice of the president even farther from the popular vote. So the League began a 2-year study and came up with the position that Donna had read. The League of Women Voters of the United States, it's a 2-year cycle, to do a study. In 1970, the League of Women Voters of the United States believes that the direct popular vote method for electing the president and the vice president is essential to representative government. The League of Women Voters believes, therefore, that the Electoral College should be abolished. Well, at that time, we got involved in testifying because Indiana Senator Birch Bayh, as part of this nationwide reaction to the 1968 election, brought a resolution to Congress to abolish the Electoral College in favor of a popular vote. And he was successful in the House of Representatives at that time and was able to get a massive bipartisan support. Even President Nixon supported a resolution to abolish the Electoral College. So the way it's worked for every amendment that we've had to the Constitution, you need to, the Congress or the Senate has to bring a resolution, and it has to pass both houses by 2/3. The president doesn't get a weigh in on it. And if both houses pass the resolution for the amendment by 2/3, then it is sent to the states, and you need to have 3/4 of the states adopt the resolution and adopt the amendment for it to be part of the Constitution. So it is a heavy lift, there's no doubt about it, but it has been done 27 times, and so it is feasible if there's enough public will. So Bayh brought it, he was successful in the House, he was able to get it passed there, but unfortunately, when it went to the Senate, dare I say, it was blocked by filibusters from Southern senators and some other senators from New York as well. And so it did, that effort did die. And the League had gotten involved there testifying, and we testified again in 97. But in the years since, from experience, every time an election comes up, people might talk about the Electoral College. Oh, that doesn't seem fair, and so and so. And then they forget about it after a little while until more recent times. So now in recent times, in 2000, we had a person who won the popular vote by 500,000 and then lost the election in the Bush-Gore election. And then in 2016, in the Clinton-Trump election, the person who won the popular vote by 3 million lost the election because the Electoral College votes went to Trump. And so that is the feature of the Electoral College that most people are aware of, that are frustrated by it. And suddenly a lot of questions were raised, and we've started to see more candidates talking about the need to abolish the Electoral College. Even the late night talk show hosts still make jokes and comments about the Electoral College and its unfairness. But even more dangerous is that at the counting of the votes of the 2020 election, even before the insurrection, some of the efforts that were made to block and undermine the process were using some of the features of the Electoral College that made the process vulnerable. And that's why we think that people have suddenly become more concerned and worried about our democracy, and that getting rid of the Electoral College is one important way to improve our democracy by amendment. So our 2017 committee was formed in 2017 in Illinois, and we went to our state league convention and got permission to go to the national convention. And what we were trying to do we knew the League of Women Voters had a position to abolish the Electoral College, but we wanted them to take it on as a project because they hadn't taken it on, given some energy and thought to it. So in 2018, we were in Chicago. It was convenient, but we were not able to get our motion passed. There were some other people from other states who were talking about other ways to abolish, to go around the Electoral College. So it was a big topic of conversation, but we were not successful in our motion to get the league to take it on. Then in 2020, it was an online convention. And what we discovered was we had caucuses at the 2020, the 2018, and we started to get some interest from other states. So the only good thing that came out of the pandemic was that Zoom was available. So now we started to get people from other states who were joining our monthly meetings and getting interested in the Electoral College. And so we were starting to get more widespread connections throughout the country through our League of Women Voter contacts, as well as all over Illinois. So people could attend our meetings no matter where they lived. And then in 2022, because we still hadn't gotten anywhere, we were feeling a little frustrated. One of our members said, we must be persistent. Let's bring our wares. We're going to go. So we did. We went to Denver. I got COVID. We brought all these things that we packed up and had them at the table, and we had a caucus. And we went into the main room for the opening session. And what do you know? Dr. Turner announces that the league was going to undertake a multi-year project to eliminate the Electoral College by an amendment to the United States Constitution. And let's see, why is it? There we go. And that the LWVUS would be making a significant financial commitment to begin building this work out during the coming fiscal year. And down in that picture, you'll see most of us are Illinois members, but in the middle is Dr. Turner. And over on the right, the second from the right is Sonia Irwin, who's vice president of the LWVUS and who's from Illinois. And then there's Evelyn Murphy right in front from New Jersey, and behind her, a lady from Pennsylvania. In the back, Gretchen Sable from Minnesota. So we had representation at the convention. We were very happy. And so we have continued to meet. We've continued to encourage other people to join our committee, to get on our mailing list. I have about 150 people on the mailing list, but only, about 20 or 25 people come each month. But there are people out there who just want to know what we're doing, want to keep up, want to get the information. So we're happy to have people. You don't have to RSVP. You don't have to come if you don't want to. But if you want to know what's going on, I'm happy to mail you our monthly notices. And these are some of our local people who, it was just after pandemic time. We were just barely out of it, but they were getting the materials together for that event that we had. So we want to welcome you. We're a jolly group. These are local people. And we love your optimism because we believe constitutional amendments can happen. We have had constitutional amendments to change the way we elect senators. They used to be chosen by the state legislatures, to give 18-year-olds the vote, to get rid of the poll tax. And in the early years, they had to change the Electoral College counting system itself because they were having a president who was not of the same party of the vice president. So these changes have been made to better our democracy. And we think that the Electoral College is another amendment that would improve our democracy. And so I thank you for your interest and support.
Thank you, Rosemary. That was such an interesting overview. And for the first time now, I think I fully understand, the history of the Electoral College. And and like you, I mean, I think most voters have, it's always been obscure until recent years. And we've seen how manipulating the Electoral College can actually be part of a political agenda and part of a strategy to negate the results of a popular vote. So I think the time is right. You've been plugging at it for years, but the time might be right. Let's hope. Now we have Alan is going to talk to us about Debunked. Alan.
Okay, thanks. First of all, can you hear me and can you see the slide?
Yes, to both.
Okay, thank you. So thanks, Rosemary, and many thanks to Louise and Donna and Harvey and the other members of the Montclair group for your kind invitation to present to you tonight. So, just in time for Halloween, here come the zombies. And like zombies, myths about the Electoral College seemingly arise from the dead, are perpetrated by feeding on half-truths and misinformation, and roam the earth endlessly. So it's time to kill them once and for all. So here we go. Here's the first myth. Without the Electoral College, large populous states would determine the outcome of the presidential election. I'm sorry, but the math just does not support this. The 6 most populous states in the nation collectively represent 41% of the US population. Even if every single voter in each of these 6 most populous states voted for the same candidate, that's a very big if, they alone would not determine the election's outcome. Now let's look at this list of the 6 biggest states again. Of these 6 large states, Pennsylvania is the only state the candidates and the media pay any attention to because it's a so-called swing state. And speaking of swing states, they are the ones that get by far the most attention, not the most populous states. The small set of swing states are the ones that determine the election's outcome. Most voters and the issues affecting them are completely ignored. In fact, the advocacy group Fair Vote tallied the number of campaign visits made during the 2020 presidential election cycle. 93% of all campaign visits were to the swing states. Here's the second myth. Voters in the largest cities would determine the outcome of the presidential election. Once again, the math doesn't support this. The population of the 100 largest cities amounts to just 20% of the US population. Now, if the voters in these 100 cities all selected the same candidate, it's still mathematically impossible for the election's outcome to be determined by just these cities. Third myth, the smallest states in the Union need the protection of the Electoral College to ensure their interests are represented. Now, when I worked for a national advocacy organization in DC that represented all the states and territories, we had a saying, if you've seen one state, you have seen one state. In other words, every state, regardless of its size, has its own unique and quite diverse interests. Under our current Electoral College system, it's a fallacy to suggest that when a small state, or any state for that matter, ends up in the red or blue columns, that this represents the interests of the entire state. It certainly does not. It's the horrible winner-take-all model that Rosemary alluded to that gives us this illusion. In fact, I would make the argument that the Electoral College enhances the electoral clout of the smaller states. And Rosemary talked about this, but we can do a quick math example. Let's look at Virginia, whose population is 8.6 million. Delaware's population is just under 1 million. Therefore, Virginia's population is nearly 9 times greater than that of Delaware. Yet Virginia only receives 4 times as many electors as does Delaware. So clearly it's the smallest states that are overrepresented in the Electoral College. Now, the League of Women Voters, and this graphic is borrowed from one of their recent presentations, the League of Women Voters analyzed the voting patterns of the smallest 1/3 of states, those with 6 or fewer electoral votes. In the 2016 presidential election cycle, the small states were evenly split between the Democratic and Republican candidates. And guess what? So were the bigger states, which tells us that small states do not vote as a unified bloc. Myth number 4, the Electoral College protects the rights of the minority from the tyranny of the majority. Well, no, that's the job of our justice system, not the Electoral College. The rights of minority groups are the domain of the court system. The court's role is to ensure the constitutional rights of the individual, regardless of the opinion of a majority of citizens. Furthermore, the US Senate treats each state equally, regardless of size. Because each state has 2 senators, a small state like Vermont has the same voice as a large state like Texas. Myth number 5, only the Democratic Party candidate would benefit from eliminating the Electoral College. Well, it's easy to see why people perpetuate this myth. After all, the minority vote winner in 2000 and in 2016 was the Republican candidate. But this superficial argument misses some real truths. Republican voters in so-called blue states are completely ignored. I'll say that again. Republican voters in states such as these get completely ignored. And we're talking millions of Republican votes, not just a handful. For example, let's look at that number of 5.2 million registered Republican voters in California. That number, 5.2 million, that's a number greater than the population of 28 individual states. Yet all these votes get ignored. And of course, Democratic Party votes in states like Texas also don't really matter. Now, one might argue that this effective disenfranchisement of so many voters contradicts the one person, one vote concept, and that it violates the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Lawrence Lessig and others have indeed argued this, but the courts so far have not been sympathetic. Remember the election of 2004? We came very close to electing a minority winner, an outcome that would have benefited the Democrats. This is the Electoral College map for the 2004 election. George W. Bush received 3 million more popular votes, and he won the Electoral College 286 to 251. But keep your eye on the state of Ohio. Had only 119,000 voters gone for John Kerry in Ohio, he would have won the Electoral College 271 to 266, even though John Kerry received 3 million fewer actual votes. Now let's just think about this for a second. Keep in mind that 119,000 votes, that is an infinitesimally small number, representing only 0.097% of the votes that were cast that year. And yet we have a system that allows a rounding error like that to potentially upend an entire election. It turns out that there are many presidential elections that nearly go off the rails like this, including the election of 2020. And now to the biggest myth of all, perhaps, it'll never happen. Well, never say never. Change can and does happen. Occasionally, societal tipping points are reached in which public opinion suddenly shifts, and what was once deemed impossible becomes possible. Change can even happen to our venerable Constitution, and Rosemary gave some examples. And here they are again. Vigorous and sustained campaigns have changed hearts and minds, forcing our elected leaders to amend the Constitution, allowing for the direct election of senators and establishing the right to vote for women. And after 136 years, the Electoral Count Act of 1887 was finally reformed through extensive bipartisan cooperation. Now, I used to work in public health, And I'm reminded that vigorous and sustained public health campaigns have changed the public's tolerance for indoor smoking or for driving under the influence. The steady decriminalization of marijuana would have seemed unthinkable a decade ago. Change can and does happen. Polls are showing that a majority of Americans favor replacing the Electoral College with a popular vote for the office of president. A Pew Research Center poll published a year ago, that's the one on the left, tells us that 63% of US adults are in favor of a popular vote for president. That's the highest level of support in over 20 years. A 2020 Gallup poll, the other poll on the right, revealed that 61% of American voters favor replacing the Electoral College with a direct vote for president. So clearly, public sentiment is already there. Voters seem to have lost faith in the country's presidential election system. The country is ready for a change in the way it elects its president, perhaps a step at a time, or maybe more boldly. We do have our work cut out for us. We need to change voters' hearts and minds state by state, community by community to achieve this tipping point when change becomes inevitable and institutional reform occurs. Just because something is hard to do doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. I'll close with reminding us what the anthropologist Margaret Mead once said: never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. So I invite everyone to sign up to our movement. You can visit us at thenationalvote.com. And with that, I'll yield the floor back. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alan. Which was also very, very interesting. And I think a lot of those myths, I think I frankly had myself, and it's interesting to talk about them. But I'll open it up, to the floor. If anybody has any questions, let's see. We can, people can raise hands. You can put in the chat. I think I'd like to start with one for Rosemary. Rosemary, do you know what the League's plans are, what Dr. Turner's plans are in terms of, taking this on as a major project for the League at a national level?
Because we really are not looking at a Congress where we're likely to get a resolution passed, the emphasis is on educating the public. And so that's what we're trying to do. And we're not too happy with they're calling it the moonshot goal, because that makes people think it's going to be decades and decades. And I tell people, yeah, but we got to the moon. So the moonshot did get there. So the main thing is spreading the word, there is an official PowerPoint presentation and a brochure that the League has on its website, and we can help people with that. With Zoom now, we can give presentations all over. What our little committee is doing, which two of us have been talking with the National League, and it's me and Joyce Williams. We're kind of like the co-chairs of the committee. And we have a dedicated LWVUS liaison in Betsy Lawson, who actually, Betsy Lawson is a retired staff for LWVUS, who is now a contracted person. She was the League representative who testified in 1997 in favor of a resolution to abolish the Electoral College. So she has a lot of experience in this. And so what we've been doing is we're trying to train more speakers. And it was actually Louise is the one who created this idea, because once the National League took on this project, we're like, well, so what is our little committee exactly? We didn't know our status. And I thought, well, we want some reason to keep meeting because we want to keep the momentum going. And Louise mentioned, how will people be able to answer questions if they have this PowerPoint with the background, but they don't feel confident enough to answer questions from the audience? So we've started having speakers every month that cover some little topic, and we've recorded them and posted them on YouTube as training modules. So they aren't available to the general public. It's an unlisted link, but a person could share it. So if a person wanted to become educated about the background of all this, they could watch these little training modules. And in December, we're going to give the whole presentation again to the committee with the idea of training the speakers and get people trained, as you know, in as many states as we can, to start giving it in their own states and to their own local leagues and other groups. You know, we've given this in Illinois. We've had quite a few people we had our own older presentation, and we gave it to all kinds of groups. We gave it to Democratic groups. We gave it to Rotary groups. We gave it to some of these, you know, specialized, I gave it to a classroom once. So we're hoping to spread this by training more trainers and educating the public, keeping it on the front burner.
Great. And then somebody else asked about what in terms of legislative advocacy do you think the league is going to be doing on this and other issues like gun control and abortion? Similarly, you know, how do we prioritize this with other positions, and are we going to be taking legislative advocacy too?
I can't speak to what the National League will do, but I can tell you that right now a bill or a resolution for an amendment, that this Congress, they're not going to do that. However, part of the outreach from the National League is for those states where it's feasible, the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. So I know in New Jersey, you already have the compact. In Illinois, we already have the compact. It's kind of a temporary effort that's a little complicated to describe. But in a few states, the state legislatures are considering adopting the compact. And so the league is encouraging the leagues in those states where it's alive to speak to their own state legislatures. But the National League is not going to advocate at a state level, but they're encouraging the state leagues in those states where it makes sense to do that legislative work. So the answer after all that is not any legislative that the National League is doing right now. Educate.
Donna, could I say a few words too? I'm really intrigued by this question. I think the viewer is asking about really big ticket items like gun control and abortion, where clearly popular polls are showing that the public is mainly on the side of these issues. But I think there are two things that, well, I'd like to comment on two things. Number one, I think that there are some structural flaws in our entire system that need to be fixed first. For example, get the money out of politics. Try to reduce the amount of gerrymandering, have the voters pick their representatives, not the other way around. And until some of these structural flaws are fixed, I don't think we're going to see a Congress that represents or reflects what most Americans want. The other thing I'd like to say, and it's kind of a little bit on the dark side, but there is evidence of this. I think change can come about if we're facing a huge calamity, disaster. Like what happened in 1968, the George Wallace third candidacy almost took the Electoral College off the rails. And that forced a lot of healthy debate, and it even got an amendment half passed in the years that followed, in the early 70s. I think that if there were another disaster, that it would really galvanize the American public. It would focus their attention. The media would be all over it. And then maybe, just maybe, advocates like us can be ready and say, here's the solution. Let's get our sleeves rolled up and let's go.
Great. And also, Alan, somebody also asked, is there, can this be done at the state level? Does it have to be a constitutional amendment, or can the states change to just a popular vote and eliminate electoral college on their own, or it has to be a constitutional amendment?
Well, I think it has to go the route of a federal constitutional amendment. And then, of course, 3/4 of the states have to pass that within their own legislative bodies. If you want to do this sort of end run thing, then I think the National Interstate Compact is kind of a mechanism that's being pursued right now. I have my own opinions about that. If anyone's interested, I'll be happy to share them. But I think that's kind of the mechanism that individual states are looking at right now.
Somebody actually asked about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Can you just describe what that is and why that's germane to our discussion?
Sure, I'll try, and then Rosemary, whatever I leave out, whatever I get wrong, you can.
Or do you want me to start?
Okay, if you want, go right ahead. Sure.
Okay. So because the compact is also approved as an interim measure by the National League. So that is part of the outreach. This is the way it works. The idea is to use that feature of the Electoral College that allows the state legislature to choose the electors. They just have to put a bill in place to give them power to do that. So let's say Illinois was one of the first signers on the compact. Illinois agreed that once enough states sign on to the compact to equal 270 electoral votes, which is the majority needed. So the signing on does not go into effect until there are enough states to sign on to it. So once that is accomplished, so that's the state that they're at right now, the people who are interested in the compact. Then, if a situation arose, such as the 2000 election or the 2016 election, where the electoral vote gave a different winner than the popular vote, those states that signed on to the compact would choose the elector. They agree that however the election goes in their state, they will choose the electors that match the winner of the popular vote. So some state out of those 270 electoral vote states, whether it's 10 or 15 or, depends on which states, some state in that group has agreed that they will choose electors different than the party that their population voted for in order for the system to work. And the argument is that therefore that will de facto elect the popular winner. And I'll stop there. You want to add to it?
Dorothy, and then I have some questions about education, but Dorothy, go ahead if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
You're still muted, Dorothy.
Yeah, just unmute yourself.
Dorothy, you're still on mute. We can't hear you. Oh, does she have permission to unmute herself, Donna?
She should. I asked her to. Let me see if I can unmute her.
Yeah. There we go.
Has the league agreed upon a standard wording of an amendment that league members all over the country could use to encourage their national, congressmen and senators to use?
Now, don't forget, we got this speaking with one voice deal in the league. So we cannot lobby our legislators for something in the federal unless we have permission. We do not have permission from national. So they are the ones that would send out an alert if that time ever came. no, there is no wording. The only goal of an amendment would be to abolish the Electoral College. And that's a whole question in itself, because there are a lot of issues if you do that. How are you going to handle different kinds of elections in different states? Are you going to include uniform election laws in all the states as part of the amendment? Are you going to do that afterwards as enabling legislation? Are you just going to say, well, we'll let them do it their own way and just count all the counts and add them all up and worry about the details later? That's a huge topic right there, is what would this amendment look like? Would it be detailed or would it be general? But as local league members, we can lobby, in Deerfield, I can lobby my Deerfield, well, I'm in Buffalo Grove, my Buffalo Grove trustee on local league issues. The state league can lobby our state legislators if they give permission to us, if the state league approves certain bills. And the same thing at the national level. We cannot, as league, the league is not asking its members to do that yet. As an individual, you do whatever you want. As an individual, as long as you don't mention the league, you can ask, and why not? Go ahead. But we can't tell you to do that right now. Right now, we're just doing education. And we got into a little bit of trouble once because we were using the league logo and telling people to talk to their legislators. And they said, no, you can't do that. Even telling people as individuals that if it's a league talking, then it has to be the National League talking on national issues. So they're not ready for that yet. And they're right, but certainly you can bring it up to your own, whatever you want to do as an individual, period, on any topic, you're certainly entitled to do so.
But again, on the education front, is really important, and then, honestly, you have to start with that anyway before you leap into advocacy and legislating and laying the groundwork. So there were some questions, Rosemary, about are there materials that could be made available for us who may want to go into schools or do civics programs on this, educating young people about the whole, there is so much misinformation and misunderstanding about, I'm not even sure that it's even taught anymore, maybe it still is, but about the Electoral College, just as you're trying to start laying the groundwork for when the time comes for when we can advocate.
Well, that even though we understand that this is a nonpartisan issue, that both parties can be hurt by the Electoral College system, we are speaking from an advocacy point of view about why it should be abolished. In today's climate, there are people out there who view this as a partisan point of view. No matter, you could talk till you're blue in the face that it's a nonpartisan issue. They will say, no, this is a knee-jerk reaction to the 2016 election, and you're just trying to brainwash our children and so forth. So a teacher would have to be very cautious about how they presented information about the Electoral College. Because if we go in, if they wanted to invite a league member and maybe someone on the other side, to talk about why the Electoral College should be maintained, they would have to do that in a way that, depending on their parents and their district and their superintendent and their policies. So I saw an idea about talking to teachers, and presenting information at a teachers conference. I think that's terrific. Teachers of National Social Studies Association or something like that. But in the classroom, I think teachers are going to be very cautious about anything that might be seen as controversial as far as the league coming in, because we have a position. If they're educated themselves, like at a conference, then the teachers can explain all these details, which are true, which are just the way it's set up. So
Alan's reminding us, he's in the chat, but we'll send it also out afterwards as links to some of the materials that the National Vote organization has, which we can do. Susan.
Yeah, hi everyone.
That's it.
Hi, Rosemary. How are you? I was at the 2018 convention that Rosemary was talking about. So they're supporting her and her group from their caucus through the main session. We weren't successful, but we ultimately got there. After that 2018 convention, a member of my local league, Peggy Dellinger, put together with the materials that Rosemary had a wonderful presentation that I'm sure still exists somewhere in our archives. So I would encourage anybody to take a look at that. It maybe needs to be a little bit updated since it's 5 years old or 4 years old at this point. I want to congratulate Rosemary again for sticking with this, and I think we'll get there eventually.
I think I got to talk about Sue. So Sue, not only did she support us at that time, but because we were not told that Dr. Turner was going to make this announcement at the 2022 convention, we had individuals contacting every single delegate at the convention, and Sue was doing it from New Jersey, and we gave her part of the delegate list, and because we had to do them individually, there was no way to broadcast to all the delegates, and so she was one of our boots on the ground people working for us in the 2022 convention, and then there we got that announcement.
Yeah.
There is now on the league website, there are 2 PowerPoint presentations. One is about the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. That's one.
Yeah.
And then the other one is the one that actually our committee put together, which is about it covers a lot of information about the Electoral College and its abolition. So those are both available on the league website. They're the approved PowerPoints. And then there's a brochure that's on the league website as well. That is the approved brochure. So if someone wants to contact me, we can give you, links to those. But you're right, Peggy. I saw Peggy. Peggy sent me her presentation. It's phenomenal, and it's not really all that outdated. It's terrific. So I would recommend Peggy's as well if you.
If we can track that down.
Yeah, just ask Peggy Dellinger. She's terrific. She's
Peggy.
done a
Yeah,
job.
we can send out all these links if we can collect them. Carmel, did you have a question or comment? Go ahead. Just unmute.
I guess I do see this as a democratic issue. It seems to be perceived that way.
Mm.
As so many things that the league does, we seem to have a democratic point of view. So what's the counter argument that Republicans will give that I, as a Democrat, would have to talk to them about? Why do Republicans want this to stay?
Because they came very close, as Ellen pointed out, in that Kerry Bush election.
Yeah.
With only 100,000 votes,
Right.
Kerry could have won the election, even though Bush was 3 million in advance.
That could have gone either way.
It could have, any of these could have gone anyway. And all you need is a fluke, and it can affect them as well as Democrats. It just happens.
I mean, I have Republican friends, and I want to say to them, why are you not for abolishing the Electoral College? And I want to know what their arguments are.
Tell them that 5 million of your colleagues in California get wasted. Their votes just get thrown out. Same thing in New York. Same thing in the populous states. I mean,
and that's factual information.
Well,
That's
actually,
verifiable information.
Oh yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Straight from the Office of the Secretary of State, those numbers. Yeah.
My other point is, this is really obscure stuff. You can't get voters to focus on a local election, never mind thinking about the Electoral College. The average voter, in my view, a town like Montclair is controlled by 400 people who are avid, have an avid interest in politics. And I guess that is true throughout the country, but the numbers are different. So how on earth do you get people to focus on this? Even this discussion, it's boring to a lot of people. It's very boring. How do you make it?
I think Carmel, I'll jump in as a layperson on this. I think the issue is because for the first time after January 6th and the subsequent reveal of how much activity was going on at state legislatures, all this legal activity designed basically at the Electoral College to have states remove their elector, their slate of electors and replace them with new ones chosen by state legislatures. And that effort is still going on. And so that is a way, if you will, I think, to subvert the popular vote by people who are afraid that they're not going to win the popular vote. And so therefore people should be a lot more concerned about this than they ever have, that this obscure part of our Constitution and the part of the election is not going to be obscure the day that the first state is successful in eliminating an electoral slate and replacing it with one chosen by the state legislature after an election.
Yeah. Could I quickly add to that too? There are 4 criminal trials against the 45th president and his minions right now. 2 of those 4 trials deal directly with his thwarting of the Electoral College process. Right. One is the federal one that has to do with the January 6th insurrection, and one is the state of Georgia, in which that was one of 7 states that did the fake electors thing. So yeah, and again, I will say that I think it takes a disaster to galvanize the public's opinion.
And
focus.
One more thing, the arguments that the people who do not think we should abolish the Electoral College mostly use are the ones that Alan covered in his presentation. Those are the most common objections that we hear, and none of them hold any water. And all of his presentation is based on data that exists. So I think if you go through this and see it again and kind of get a feel for all those topics that Alan covered, that's mostly what we hear when they object. And I have one more thought too. And I don't mind if someone can't be convinced, but if they're willing to talk about this, the main problem that we've always had is that people forget about this topic. And so they just put it in the background, and then, something else happens and they're like, oh, surprised. Even if you're engaging with people who don't agree with your point of view, if you're engaging with them and talking with them about it, it's keeping the topic alive and keeping the conversation going. And so they may not agree with you when you're discussing it with them, but they may go home later that night and start thinking about it, or they might tell someone, yeah, I had this argument with Rosemary about the Electoral College. She's so full of baloney, but I told her this and I told her that. And they say, oh, good for you, because the Electoral College, and it keeps it in the public conversation. And that's been one of our big hurdles, is that people don't want to talk about it, forget about it. It's not important. It is important. And so
it's actually in the public conversation right now with 2 of these 4 criminal cases that will be litigated in early 2024, just in time for primary season.
Harvey.
I think the most common answer to Carmel's question that I've heard is that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that, in 236 years or whatever, the popular winner didn't win 5 times. I think the counter to that is if you were going in for some minor surgery and the doctor says, oh, don't worry, only less than 10% of the patients die from this. I think you would think twice about it. But it's a good question.
Dorothy.
One of the things that worries me is that if in educating the public here in New Jersey and tell them that a person in Camden's, that his vote for president isn't as meaningful as someone in Philadelphia, that they're not going to bother to vote. And I would exhort all of us to try to keep in mind that this is just a presidential election that we're talking about, because we don't want them to come to the conclusion that, voting is not, our vote doesn't count in those states that aren't swing states.
Well, except, what, people know that very well. And we have a slide that shows that the turnout in the swing states is considerably higher than the turnout in the quote safe states, because people are already cynical and they already are discouraged because all they have to do is watch the news. You know, in Illinois, it's been a long time since a Republican won in Illinois, and we have a lot of Republicans. In fact, the last election, 3.5 people voted for Biden and 2.5 voted for Trump. That's pretty typical. Most of the states are really purple. You know, it's always like 40 something to 50 something or 40. And so people are already aware of that and they don't turn out. And because they already are cynical. And if they don't turn out for the presidential election, they're not voting for the down ballot people either, are they? So I think that damage has already been done. People are aware of that.
Yeah.
And it looks like we have one last question because we're kind of over time now. And the question is, one can divide electoral votes according to the popular vote without abolishing the Electoral College. Is that correct?
Rosemary touched upon that earlier.
Yes.
She surely did, where she actually looked at the text of the Constitution that gives the states the leeway to decide how do they divvy up their electors. And it just turns out that 48 out of 50 right now do the winner-take-all system, but that's not written in stone. They don't have to do that. They can go the route of Maine and Nebraska and do that. But here's the thing. Right now you have winner-take-all states. If you do that, you'll have winner-take-all districts. And the way they're so severely and obnoxiously gerrymandered by both the Democrats and the Republicans, you will still have a very skewed turnout. So I don't think that's the theory is it's there, but it's not a really sound solution.
Okay, and on that note, I think we're going to have to bring this to an end. Rosemary Allen, thank you so much for joining us tonight and informing us. I think we'll give you a big round of silent applause since everyone's.
Thank you so much.
We very much appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, and it's nice to see some familiar faces, and we really thank our friends in New Jersey for supporting us. And Alan
we'll
is a
send out the
wonderful
recording
partner.
and the links too. We'll send out all the links that were mentioned too afterwards. So thank you all. All right.
Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.